You might have heard people talk about radical responsibility, and maybe you're all over it. You might be in a place where you feel like you always take responsibility for everything about your life, and that is amazing. If that is you, that is awesome. You're probably going to want to skip this episode. But I find that even me, someone who knows how crucial it is for transformation, fulfillment, and purpose, have moments where I don't take responsibility, where I don't want to. I'm just being a little bit stubborn. I'm like, I don't want to do this. But also, I find myself challenging that because I don't want to fall into old patterns either. So if that relates or feels aligned for you, stay tuned. Radical responsibility in very simple form means taking ownership of your life, your emotions, and your circumstances. Not as a burden, not from a place of victimhood, but as a way of really taking back power in your life and creating internal freedom. And you can't have internal freedom unless you're taking radical responsibility for your life. Sometimes things happen to us that we aren't happy with. We can be quick to blame other people or situations about what's happened. It's easy to go external. It's easy to look at all of the things outside of us as a reason of why things don't feel so great. When you take radical responsibility, while of course there are going to be situations where some things are completely out of your control, radical responsibility is about owning the part that you played. You're not making it about someone else. You're not worried about anyone else. You're focused on you. Again, there are going to be situations where, unfortunately, awful things happen to people and they have played absolutely no part in that. And that may be the case for you. Maybe something awful has happened and you played absolutely no part. I've had things like that happen to me. And so I'm not saying take blame for things that you didn't do. We're not here for that. We're not taking on extra stuff. But radical responsibility in this situation is taking ownership for how you're feeling, what you're navigating, and choosing not to get stuck and dwelling on it. When I say this, I am not saying dismiss your healing, suppress your pain, avoid all of that. Not at all, because you have to do that, right? You have to do both. So maybe it is healing and working through the pain and navigating that part and then taking responsibility. Because the radical responsibility in that situation is what happens after. What do you choose to do after? How do you choose to take responsibility for the path that you ultimately go down? How are you going to live your life? That is your part. That is taking radical responsibility. I hope this is making sense because it's about you. It's about focusing on you. So yes, there are going to be situations that you've been in where you have played a part in something. Taking radical responsibility is putting your hand up and being like, yeah, I actually did that. And I'm sorry. Or maybe it's not apologizing. Maybe it's just simply acknowledging what you did and looking at why and how you can move forward. And there are going to be times where you have been traumatized or impacted or hurt and you haven't played a part in that. And so the role of your responsibility is to choose what you do afterwards. So to kind of break down or to make this easier to understand, I want to talk about some of the key components really quickly about radical responsibility. So, as I've said, taking ownership. You take full responsibility for your actions, your choices, and resulting consequences. So I said there will be times when you have done things that maybe you're not proud of, and there's been a consequence. Taking ownership of that, being like, yeah, that happened because I did this, and not from again, we're not adding more blame or shame or guilt or anything like that. It's just owning it. Owning your emotions is another part. You accept that your emotions are yours. They're created internally and they aren't caused by other people. My 4-year-old currently has this He hits, and when he gets really angry, he can't control his emotions and he'll hit. And I've learned I can't ask him why because he just says, I don't know. And I'll say, what made you do that? Or what were you thinking? And he blames it on another little kid that he goes to childcare with. He'd be like, this kid made me do it. I'm like, he's not even here. This is not owning your emotions, right? And so it's about educating him that how he's feeling is a result of him, not a result of someone else. Moving away from blame. So instead of blaming external factors, people, whatever, for the problem or for your problems, you look internally for solutions. So rather than focusing on problems, we're looking at solutions. Also, rather than focusing on blame, so pointing the finger, being like, well, this happened because of this and this happened because of this. It's like, okay, how can I resolve this? And for a number of years, I was stuck in this blame cycle where I was very quick to blame a couple of people for my situation. And ultimately, I kind of got wrapped up in this thing because of other people. But when I was in that blame mindset, nothing changed. And so I got to a point where I was like, okay, it's done, whatever. How do I move through this? How do I get past this? What do I need to do? And part of that was taking responsibility for the fact that, you know, I had done things in the past that kind of were all weaved in this, but and it can be messy, right? It can be messy. But it's like rather than me wasting my energy blaming other people because that gets us nowhere, it's about what can I do to fix this? What can I do to resolve this? Another one is empowerment over burden. So consciously choosing to claim your power, to claim your strength, to claim your freedom, not as a burden, right? The conscious choice to choose to empower yourself, choose to move forward, rather than feeling like what's happened is a burden to you. Focusing on choice, you know, radical responsibility highlights that you always have a choice. You always have a choice in how you react or respond to situations, what you do afterwards, what path you go down. And sometimes things will happen and you automatically react or respond without thinking about it, right? But then you have a choice what you do after that, right? So what can I do? And so often when I feel myself getting really reactive, I remove myself from the situation. So I come back and so I respond in a way that I choose as opposed to kind of getting caught up in that reactivity. And the biggest part of radical responsibility is self-awareness and growth. It involves constant self-reflection and a commitment to self-improvement. And again, not in a heavy way, but in a curious way. What can I do? What's happened here? Why do I feel like this? What can I do better next time? We all fuck up, we all fail, we all go through challenges, but we get to choose what we do afterwards. When we're aware of what's going on internally, it makes everything else so much easier. So, there's a little breakdown of, some of the components that I believe to be so important for radical responsibility. And maybe you're wondering why we need this for transformation. Because we do. Ultimately, if you want to transform your life, you need radical responsibility. Because unless you are taking radical responsibility for your life, you won't achieve the transformation that you're looking for. You won't see the growth that you're after. And it's likely that you're never going to feel fulfilled or content because you're giving your power away. When you're not taking responsibility for your life, you're leaving it up to other people and other situations. And how can you possibly have contentment and fulfillment when you're relying on leaving it to other people? Your power, strength, ownership is yours. It is yours. And we spend far too much of our life giving that away to other people. Yes, there are going to be times where it's really uncomfortable, times where you are embarrassed, times where you might feel shame or guilt or a whole bunch of other emotions that don't make you feel that great. But that is part of growth. That is part of self-awareness. That is part of radical responsibility. Because once you move through those, then comes freedom. Then comes liberation. Then comes this like expanded lightness. It's like reclaiming your truth. And that is one of the most powerful things you can ever do because you are claiming your life and you are taking radical responsibility for your life. You are choosing you. And you have heard me talk so many times about how important it is to choose you and also how challenging it can be in today's society. So, that, my friend, is why radical responsibility is so needed to stretch you, to help you grow, to help you find and connect with freedom, and ultimately to help you transform your life because that's what you're here for.